Welcome to another edition of the NBA Exchange. I'm your host, Dexter Henry. And maybe you haven't heard, but the playoffs are coming. They are right around the corner for the National Basketball Association. And the play-in tournament, that is less than a few days away. Now, with that play-in tournament, the stakes for these games every night to close out the regular season, they're extremely high. Teams are still fighting for so much. And a lot happened last night in the association. So let's get right to it on the NBA Exchange. It's playoff season in South Florida. You know my man Brian Fonseca's happy about that. The Miami Heat clinched a playoff spot after a 129-121 victory over the Boston Celtics in Beantown. And they've swept the Celtics in their late season 2-game series, pretty much placing the Celtics in the play-in tournament. It's all but virtually over for them as far as making the regular playoffs, but they will be in the play-in tournament. And this was an incredible performance by the Miami Heat as they won for the 10th time in the last 13 games. Maybe even more impressive was the fact that they took control of the game in the third quarter after their star, Jimmy Buckets Butler, left the game with an eye injury.
We're a team, so it's not really who has each other's back. It's just we're all playing the game together. So, we all got each other's back, regardless of if he was out or not.
So the Miami Heat find themselves in a good position to close out this season. They're in a virtual tie for fourth place with the Atlanta Hawks and the New York Knicks. We'll get to them later, but they're actually sitting in the fifth spot as a result of the tiebreakers that they hold currently, and they can get as high as fourth. 3 games left to play. They're looking good, sort of looking like the Miami team that we saw make a run to the NBA Finals last year with their strong play in the bubble. We'll see if they can keep that up. Now, the other marquee matchup of the night that was on TNT last night was a big city matchup between the Los Angeles Lakers and the New York Knicks. They battled in LA. It was a game at times that looked like it was a game sort of out of the 90s. And I don't mean the physicality at all, guys, but it was the defensive intensity that you liked. It was definitely there. Felt like a 90s game, very low scoring, minus the three-point shots that you didn't see as much in that era of basketball during that time. However, the level of defense, as I said, was extremely high in this contest. In the end, the Lakers came out on top with a 101-99 victory over the New York Knicks. And the hero of this game was Talen Horton-Tucker. Yeah, THT came up big for the defending champs, knocking down the go-ahead three-pointer with just over 21 seconds left in overtime. And the victory for the Lake Show made it 2 wins in a row, and it was the first time they had done that since March.
We haven't won 2 in a row in a while. And, obviously we hit that stretch where, we lost 8 out of 10. So, it's been a challenging time for all of us, but we've remained together. We're confident in what we can accomplish, come playoff time. Hopefully we can get there healthy.
So the victory keeps the Los Angeles Lakers alive for the 6th seed. They are still only a game back of the Portland Trailblazers and Dallas Mavericks. Now remember, both of those teams still hold a tiebreaker over the Lakers, but the Lakers don't want to play in the play-in tournament, so they're happy to keep their winning ways alive. 2 in a row for the Lake Show. Now the Knicks, on the other hand, they were not as happy after last night's game. They returned to New York after a 3-3 road trip, and they have a chance to close things out in the season strongly if they want to.
Some would call it a success. I feel like we had a chance to go 5-1. I had a chance to close it out, make it a successful trip. 4-2, put it on me.
So Julius Randle holding himself accountable, saying he needs to do more. Knicks fans really wanted to clinch that playoff spot last night, and that's what the Knicks failed to do with that victory. And as I mentioned before, they are in a tie with Atlanta and Miami, but that drops them to 6. So the Knicks kind of lost where they were in the 4th spot, where they would have had a home court advantage in the first round, but still 3 games left. And with those 3 games left, got to ask our producer, Gregory Alcala. He's a big-time Knicks fan. Greg, how disappointed were you in this loss? I know you wanted this one real bad, man. How disappointed were you about this?
It's only disappointing because the Knicks had a chance to win that game. Like they had a lead in the 4th quarter. They just couldn't hold it. But I'd say that where Knicks fans are probably feeling a little bit sad about this loss is that they dropped to 6. And if the Knicks keep that 4th spot, that they're going to play the Atlanta Hawks in the first round, and that's a favorable matchup for the New York Knicks. They're 3-0 against the Hawks this season. dropping to 6. If the season ends today, they're playing the Bucks.
Right.
And they're 2-1 against the Bucks, but one of those wins came against the Bucks when they sat all their starters. So you can't really look too much into that. So yeah, it's sad, but I think the Knicks, when it comes to the last 3 games of the season against the Celtics, the Spurs, and the Hornets, they have a chance to win all 3 of those games.
Well, here's the thing. Well, then here's the thing, and I got to ask you, are you confident they're going to close this season out strong on a 3-game winning streak? That's what you would like going into the playoffs. Are you confident they can do that? I
think more realistically it'll be 2-1, but the Celtics just lost Jaylen Brown for the season, so they're a little bit vulnerable right now. So there's a real chance that the Wings could close out the season and win these last 3 games.
All right. We will see what the Knicks can do, see if they can close the season out strong, because if they don't, Knicks fans not going to be happy about that. Every Wednesday, we got a segment. It's called NBA with Nuance, and we're going to have my man, Jarod Hector. He'll be joining me every Wednesday. We're going to discuss things around the NBA with a bit more nuance than you might see some other places where they discuss things around the NBA. So I want to introduce my man, Jarod Hector. You can see his work on True Hoop. Also, he is the co-host of the 7 Footers Pod, and he also joins me every Thursday on the Props Network for NBA Picks and Props. Jarod, what's up, man? How you doing?
What's good, my guy? Yeah, that's right. NBA Nuance with me. This ain't no hot take culture over here. None of that mess on this show.
Nah, none of that at all. So for this first edition of NBA with Nuance with my man, Jarod Hector, we are going to talk about positional flexibility and how that's going to impact the voting for this year's All-NBA team. So Jarod, there's been a lot about this, and for the folks that have to vote on this, we know the voting for All-NBA is very important. It can impact what salary guys have, whether they're eligible for the Supermax or not. A lot of the things has a lot of impact, and now we have this positional flexibility, but I want you to explain to the people exactly what's going on with that.
First of all, shout out to the NBA. Adam Silver, I'm still waiting on my voting application for All-NBA and the NBA Awards. You know where to find me to hook it up. All right. No, it's interesting, Dexter, right? All NBA is critical, as you mentioned, because it does impact so many different things, from Supermax contracts to players, salaries, etc. And the way in which it's been done for several years is you vote based on position, right? 2 guards, 2 forwards, and a center. Well, this year, they're making it different, where they're having players listed as both centers and forwards, and some players listed as both forwards and guards, right? That makes the whole process of identifying who are the 15 best players in the league, because, again, 3 All-NBA teams, that gives you some sort of like angst. And every year, All-NBA is difficult because you're nitpicking, and that's what you have to do when you're talking about the 15 best people in a league that only has 450 players.
Yeah, you definitely have to do that. Well, let me ask you this then. When you look at that and this positional flexibility and what they're doing, do you like this? Do you like the fact that you can now toggle some players between guard or forward and center? Do you like that? Are you a fan of this move?
It's tough, right? Because what it does is it allows you to, when you have a guy that you really like, it allows you to like make sure you get him on one of the teams. And that's going to happen with voters. Because look, as much as we all want to think that this is done like, with just strictly science and numbers and eyeballs, there's bias involved, because basketball is an emotional sport and it's entertaining, and we like certain people's style of play more than we like others, right? And that's going to come into play here. But I do like that. I think ultimately what the league should really do, though, Dexter, is no positions. Just who are the 5 best guys on each team. That's it. If it's 5 guards that year, it's 5 guards. If it's 5 forwards, it's 5 forwards. Whatever. But this whole, just having to adhere to the guards, just the 5 best guys. That's it. And then we move on.
I'm with you on that, right? Like, if we're going to have positions, then let's have positions and have those positions matter according to where people play in those positions the most. If you're not going to have them, let's just go positionless. We've seen moves to do this. I know it's different with the All-Star team, but obviously they went to 3 front court players, getting rid of center. Let's just go with the best 5 players, regardless of position, for whatever team. I think that should be the move going down the road. I'm not necessarily a fan of the flexibility between forward, center, or guard, forward. Don't really like it. But here we are. This is what we have. Let's look at, there's obviously 2 of the front runners for MVP this year are Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid, 2 guys that play the center position. We haven't seen 2 big men dominate this game in quite some time, Jarod. But if you're voting, there's a way you could have them both on the same team. They both could make first team because you could put one at forward. I guess I could ask how you feel about that. I kind of know how you feel about that. But how does this really impact big men, specifically this year?
I mean, it's tough, right? Because the big man, we talked about it for so long, right? The idea was the big man's getting, ruled out of basketball. And that isn't actually true. The big man is very relevant as much today as they were, in the George Mikan era. The difference is the big man today has to be highly skilled. And that's what we have when we're talking about Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid. These are highly, highly, highly skilled big men, right? Nikola Jokic has damn near guard skills, right, as a 7-footer. And Joel Embiid can stretch the floor out to 3 and can punish you inside, right? That's the kind of ability you have to have as a center in this game. And look, it's crazy to think that Jokic will be your first team center and then you have to move Embiid to second team, right? So that the thought process there is, nah, you got to make Embiid a forward. Because if it were who were the 5 best players in the league this year, Embiid is certainly among the top 5 players this year. So he'd have to be on the list if we were doing positionless. But because we're not doing positionless and we have to have center or forward, I still don't like the idea of him at forward because he doesn't play forward, right? He plays center. Right. That's not the position he plays. So I would keep him there. The other interesting part there, Dexter, is, are we sure Embiid is second team center? Or is Rudy Gobert the second team center? Ooh. Yes, I know. Rudy. Listen, here's the problem with Rudy. He doesn't have the ball in his hands. And when you are watching basketball, it is much easier for you to look at who has the ball in their hands and what they're doing. But look at every possible advanced metric, offensively and defensively, and compare Rudy and Joel, and it might be eye-opening to you.
It's interesting there because you make a great point. It could hurt Rudy Gobert in this situation, but if you end up putting Embiid or Jokic at forward, even though I agree with you that neither of them have played the 4 or any forward spot most of this season. They've primarily been at the 5, but that could help Gobert go from maybe where most people may vote for him at third team and could bump him up to second team. So there's obviously a huge difference there. Let's look at the hybrid players also, Jarod. Let's talk about the guards. The people who primarily play the wings, whether it's a point or they could be playing at a forward, like a Luka Doncic, like a Paul George, others like that. How is this decision now with the positional flexibility affecting those hybrid players?
Well, that's interesting, right? Because you mentioned Luka, Paul George, LeBron James, right? I mean, now, part of the problem you have this year and for me, when I look at all NBA and if I'm casting voting, here's how I look at it. Games played matters, right? Because we've had so many injuries this year, so many guys with COVID protocols and missed games. You would think, here's an interesting point. This isn't a hybrid, but I think it's an interesting point to make nonetheless. Who's played more games this year, Jimmy Butler or Kyrie Irving?
I believe Jimmy Butler has.
No, Kyrie Irving. And see, that's the thing, right? It's just, it is, and that's a whole narrative thing, which we can talk about later, but it's so fast. And Jimmy's one of those, right? A hybrid forward guard. Where do I slot him? Where do I put him? I think it makes it interesting and difficult. And if we do that, that's going to eliminate certain guys. Like for the Phoenix Suns, for instance, everyone's going to say Chris Paul, no doubt, it's got to be your second team guard. What does that do with Devin Booker? Devin Booker even make an All-NBA team this year, even though he probably should.
What also about someone like even Donovan Mitchell, who possibly could not make an All-NBA team, and then maybe the Jazz, who look like they're going to finish with the best record in the league, might not have as much representation in All-NBA.
The Jazz will end up having one player in Gobert, and this is a shout out to our boy Murph. Are we sure Donovan Mitchell has been the most impactful guard on the Jazz this season?
Don't know. Could be Mike Conley. Some people may argue that. Could see an argument for that. Do you see this? The way the game's going, Jarod? Do you see this down the road being more problematic when we come in terms of voting for bigs or hybrid players? Like, which group of players do you see this being more problematic for?
I think for both, right? Because I think as we're seeing an evolution in the game of basketball, right? It used to be back in the day, all the tall kids when we were growing up playing basketball, what did the coach do? Stuck them down on the block. All right, big man, you go to, and it's like, and shout out to Bomani Jones, I'm not big man, I am tall man, right? Like there's a difference between big man and tall man, right?
There is.
And I think, so a lot of youth coaches have gotten better over the years. The tall kids are still being allowed to develop guard skills because that's what matters. The NBA, and it's not that it wasn't highly skilled compared to the 50s, yes, this is like night and day. I was going to say those guys were, But Bob Cousy couldn't dribble with his offhand, but that's a whole other conversation for a different day. Channel from nice. But it is imperative that kids come out, if they're tall, whatever, with all the skills necessary. So this is going to be a thing going forward, which goes back to what we said at the beginning, Dexter, which is the NBA is going to have to eventually get rid of positions, and we just go, look, man, the 5 best dudes, or in this case for all NBA, the 15 best dudes, we'll shake it out. That's how it's going to be.
Well, we'll wrap with this. We're going forward, right? Do you think this is going to happen, and how soon will we see this happen? Because I think there's going to be more conversations around this, like we're having right now, right, man? But will this happen maybe next year? Will we see that the NBA has been a league that's shown that they're willing to change, as we've seen with the play-in tournament this year, willing to try new things? We speak all the time about the beauty of the game right now being positionless basketball. Shouldn't that be reflected in the awards as well? So we think this would be on the horizon, right?
I would think so. The thing about the NBA, as much as it is a forward-thinking league, and with the play-in tournament and the various different things that they do, it still leans on some tradition, right? And there is something about 2 guards, 2 forwards, a set, right? There is something about that old school traditionalists still like. I'm not going to call Adam's not an old school traditionalist, but those are things that the competition committee and the various people who make those decisions lean on. I will say that going forward, as they start changing and figuring out how we're going to make this game more appealing to the next generation of fans, the idea of going positionless, I think is the way to go. So if that doesn't happen within the next 5 seasons, I'd be worried.
Definitely something to keep your eye on. Definitely something to talk about it. That's it for this week's edition of NBA with Nuance. With my man Jarod Hector. We'll be doing this every Wednesday, talking to you with some nuance around basketball. As Jarod said, this ain't hot take culture, man. No hot take culture here.
No hot takes here, man. You can find that other places. We don't do that here.
We don't do that on the NBA Exchange. Thanks, Jarod. Appreciate it, man.
Appreciate you, man.